Space. I reckon that's a lonely place to call home for two travel-weary bluegrasstrounauts. But between the long shifts of fishing for hydrocarbon in the lakes of Saturn's moon Titan, there's just enough time to get some picking in. So hush up your mug and fetch a jug of lunar shine while you can join us in the loneliest honky-tonk this side of the Appalachian supercluster. By God, here she is a-coming. A new transmission of Podcast with Marcel, featuring Hayes Griffin.
You know, now that we're big-time space adventurers, we probably need a cool name for the ship.
You mean something like the Death Star or the USS Enterprise?
Hayes, the Death Star is a space station, not a ship. Also, its name's the DS-1 Orbital Battle Station.
Please stop.
And you gotta be more specific than the USS Enterprise. There's like 30 of those. Just say NCC 1701D because I know you're thinking of TNG.
Stop! We don't need some nerdy sci-fi name with a bunch of numbers because we already have that. Haven't you ever noticed the sign on the wall?
MC 58957D. Wait, why would I notice that? I've always been terrible at this job. JD, did you notice this?
Of course.
Okay, rude. It is weird that it ends with a D insignia, even though this isn't a Galaxy-class ship.
We've been over this. Star Trek isn't real.
No. I'm pretty sure Star Trek is like the longest documentary ever filmed.
I'm settling this. JD, is Star Trek real?
I don't know. Sounds like Marcel knows what he's talking about.
You're both idiots. And Marcel, the D stands for Dreadnought.
Why would they name our workship after a guitar? That doesn't make any sense.
Just sit down.
So what, you think we need a casual nickname for the ship? Like Grace or Majesty or Debbie?
That's a SpongeBob quote, and besides, this old beauty is showing her age a bit. What about something more noble, like the Antique?
Ooh, I like that. JD, can we name the ship the Antique?
JD doesn't work for us. You don't need to ask his permission. JD, can we name the ship the Antique?
Of course.
Well, good. We got all of that settled. JD, you mind bringing us a couple Miller Lights?
Coming right up.
I'm gonna need a few of them putting up with you guys today. I smell some mischief in the air. There's something on the ship today. You know what I mean? It feels wily around here.
I feel you on that. Yeah, me and JD got plans. We'll do our thing later. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. It won't involve you. Man, I've been thinking about this thing, and I've talked about it a little bit before, but I feel like I want to revisit it. I want to do it better. And I want to hear your thoughts. Does that sound good to you?
100%, buddy.
Sounds like the boys might be talking about some bluegrass history.
Gibson Guitars. Awful company. Am I right?
I see where this is headed. Yes. Agreed.
I think the most popular thing that I've ever said about Gibson Guitars is about the time that they took several hundred guitars that they could not sell, his very unpopular model, and they lined them up in an empty field, and then they drove construction equipment over them to destroy the guitars, because if you won't buy the guitars, no one can have them. Could have donated them to a children's hospital. You could have given them to literally anyone. And they instead decided to destroy the product. And you can look this up. It sounds like I'm making it up and like it's supervillain stuff, but for real, there's videos of guys taking not only, this guitar model that wouldn't sell, but they shut down a factory, I believe in Tennessee. They didn't want to move all this product, basically. So you can watch a guy hold like a 335 and just run it through like a bandsaw. It's the wildest thing I've ever seen. Like the dude who just finished building it, is just like, here we go, just pushing it through. Isn't that wild?
I mean, as a guy that's seen luthiers at work, and Gibson Guitars, I'll say this, even though we were kind of, they've had their ups and downs over the year. They're high quality instruments. There's a lot of hours that go into making these instruments. They're bound. The necks are finished and radiused and all that. You know what I mean? I'm with you. It's crazy to see that destroyed like that.
I think my previous statement shows that I'm not talking about the guitars being terrible. I would be happy to own a Gibson guitar. I wouldn't be ashamed to do that. I think the actual problem with the company is the management. I feel like every couple of years they're like, oh, well, this guy's the CEO now. Everything's going to be good. And then something weird, embarrassing, and terrible happens.
And I think we could probably have a contest to see who could toss out more ridiculous things that Gibson has done over the years, right? You know, that's crazy.
Yeah, there was a really popular one, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where they released a video called "Play Authentic," and it was all about how they were going to start sort of going after companies that were doing the same designs that they were doing. Right? They were going to say like, "Hey, stop! Why would you buy a Dean Flying V when you can buy a Gibson Flying V?" And it was this video that was supposed to be very like positive, like play authentic, play the real Flying V, don't play the Dean. And it's got the upbeat music, you know, and all the interviews with the Gibson employees. Everyone flipped out. Everyone was so mad, and they took down the video in maybe like 12 hours. Isn't that not? That's just a classic example, right?
I think it is. That one seems to encapsulate some of the cringe that has been associated with their gaffes over the years.
That's kind of where I want to start, because Dean were the people that got sued, specifically for the Flying V here in America. And their parent company is called Armadillo Enterprises. Basically, Gibson was going around saying that, you know, why buy a cheap knockoff when you could buy the original? And I think to a lot of people, the Dean Flying V was superior. And so it's not exactly a cheap knockoff if it's better, right? If it's an improvement on the product.
Exactly. And I mean, there are many shredders who would have chosen a Dean over a Gibson. You know, history, just look it up. Look at any guitar magazine from the 80s or 90s, right?
So when this lawsuit came out, Armadillo Enterprises put out a statement. I'll read the statement. They said, "We believe that Gibson's claims are baseless and will vigorously defend ourselves. As the proud owner of some of the most famous brands in the music industry, we respect and value the intellectual property rights of others, but we also recognize that some things are just too commonplace and basic for one company to claim as property. Dean Guitars has been continuously offering the Z and V-shaped guitars at issue in the lawsuit since at least 1976. They offered this product for 40 years, and Gibson didn't defend their copyright. Until now, they want to go and say, hey, this is a problem." I think we all know that if you don't defend your intellectual property, you lose the right to like have, you know, licensing on that. For instance, the term yo-yo was owned by the Duncan Corporation, and it became such a commonly used term that they lost copyright on it. And now other companies like Yomega or whoever can use the term yo-yo in their marketing because it's become commonplace. I think that's kind of what happened with the Flying V here, or at least V-shaped guitar. Maybe not the term Flying V. It might be trademarked, which is slightly different law, but still the shape of the guitar can no longer be held up like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen that happen with other brands over the years, but that's...
Your Band-Aids or Kleenex or whatever, those companies are always trying to defend their like right to these names, right? Gibson also took that lawsuit to Europe, and they lost. They lost against Dean too. They lost against everyone. Basically, every single time they try to like refile these copyrights or whatever, they get challenged, right? It doesn't work as great. And I think that's actually true in Europe. They tried to file a copyright for the body shape, and it was disputed at the time, way back when, and they never like sort of finished that paperwork or something. So in Europe, really their claims had nothing to back them up.
No standing.
Yeah, exactly. So Gibson appeals all of these multiple times. They keep pushing it. This is all set up, right? This is important because there are so many companies that offer, for instance, Fender has the Telecaster, and there's a million different offerings of like T-style guitars, right, where people are basically making Telecasters, and Fender doesn't care.
Yeah, it's funny to me with the Fender instance because the thing that they've copyrighted is the headstock design. That's what they care about. They'll go after you for using the headstock, but the Strat body and the Tele body, like you said, it's ours. You know what I mean? Like the kind of Publix or whatever at this point.
Well, imagine if someone, for instance, Gibson Corporation, I don't know what would be a copyright, I guess, on their headstock design, the open book headstock design, right, with the little swirl out from the middle. Imagine if they just stole that. Imagine if luthiers had been using that headstock design for like 100 years, and then Gibson took it from the public domain, you know, put a trademark or copyright or whatever it would be on the headstock on that, and then started pursuing anyone that used that same headstock design.
That would seem pretty crappy.
That's the truth. That's history. That happened. Isn't that wild?
Oh man, like in some ways it doesn't surprise me, but like lay it on me.
I think the first big thing that the Gibson company stole is their headstock design, because you can find examples of that headstock. I think the earliest one I've seen is like 1902 or 1903, which is, I mean, kind of back at the beginning, because that's around the time that Gibson was founded, right? Martin's 1833. It's wild to think that, but yeah, if you put that in perspective, Martin has been doing their thing for getting close to 100 years. And then Gibson starts, and they start their company with a bang by using a headstock design that lots of people have used, but saying, oh no, that's mine, you can't use it. Not a great look, right?
Not a great look.
Here's an interesting fact about the Martin Company. Like I said, they started in 1833. About 100 years later, in the 1930s, they started manufacturing Dreadnoughts, which is, I would consider kind of like their flagship model. I think most people associate Martin with Dreadnoughts. At least when I picture a Martin in my brain, like I picture the Dreadnought body shape. I think most people do.
I would say so. Andy Griffith played a Dreadnought. Hank Williams played a Dreadnought.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Exactly. And they actually were releasing those as early as 15 years before that. So in like 1915, 1916, they were manufactured by Martin, but they were being released by the Oliver Ditson Company. If you've ever heard that, sometimes, you know, you'll see like someone's got like an old Martin and they're like, oh, this is like an Oliver Ditson Dreadnought. You know, it's like this weird, rare thing. But yeah, so even earlier than 100 years after that, you know, they were releasing this Dreadnought. It's innovative. It's revolutionary. You know, everyone's excited about this Dreadnought. So many people are playing them in bands because it's bigger, it's louder, it's got more punch. You know, it's what everyone wants. All of these other companies started releasing bigger guitars. They wanted to compete with Martin because Martin basically was the only one offering a guitar in that size. And Martin didn't pursue any of those companies with like litigation. They welcomed the competition, and Martin has survived. We're now 100 years after that date, and Martin is still offering a great product, and they didn't have to do any legal reckoning to make that happen, right? But one company that had only existed for like 30 years also decided to make a big guitar. They called it a jumbo. And that company is Gibson. And they ripped that design from Martin. Which means Gibson stole their headstock, and then 30 years later, their most popular line of acoustic guitars is a rip of Martin, right? So,
and I want to say this, because I know about this one a little bit, because I know there are people that are going to say, the jumbo has slope shoulders, it doesn't look like the Dreadnought, this and that. So, one, it was a direct response to Martin's release of the Dreadnought. Gibson, like, it has been well documented that Gibson was like, yo, Martin released this thing, it's super popular, we got to do ours. And then they eventually just release a square shoulder Dreadnought in the 50s, right? Totally rip it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a weird argument to make, to be like, oh, no, it had nothing to do with Martin. It's like, oh, yeah, Martin had a very popular large body guitar that was selling, and like they weren't even looking at the market. They just happened to be like, what if we made a guitar but bigger? Like, no, that didn't happen. It was because of Martin.
Yeah, exactly.
To rub salt in the wound, you know, when we see guitars with that body shape by any manufacturer, we tend to call them Dreadnoughts. We don't call them a jumbo. When I'm looking at Bourgeois or a Thompson or Pre-War or whatever, whether or not they call it a Dreadnought, I call it a Dreadnought.
Of course. And there's always some sort of nod to the Dreadnought heritage and history in the names of those companies. Like, I play a Leo Posh guitar. It's a Dreadnought-sized guitar, and it's mahogany, and it's the Leo Posh DM. You know? Like,
wonder where that came from, yeah. But yeah, only 30 years into their life as a company, they're already playing those tricks. They're already playing those games. But surely, you know, Gibson being, I think, much more well-known for their electric guitar designs, I mean, surely they never stole any of those. I mean, how could Gibson do that? It wouldn't fly. So let me tell you about O.W. Appleton. He was a musician in Burlington, Iowa. He was very handy, and he played a bunch of different string instruments. He played like guitar, ukulele, bass, banjo. He played everything. In 1925, he figured out that he could amplify an acoustic guitar using the tone arm of an RCA phonograph. So he's taking like the vibrating part of the like where the needle would go to like read the record, and he's putting that on the top of a guitar and running that back into the stereo to amplify his guitar. He came up with that.
Whoa! That's not even a way I would have like imagined amplifying an acoustic instrument, but of course, right? That's what the tone arm of a record player does.
So he and like, you know, on his own invented a guitar pickup just from like stuff around the house. And throughout the rest of the 1930s, he kept sort of innovating on his design for this like pickup system. And he figured out that acoustic guitars were terrible for amplification because there was too much resonance. So he realized that if he could decrease the vibrations, he'd get a better better amplified sound, but a worse acoustic sound, which didn't bother him. That's what he wanted. So he tried filling up acoustic guitars with things like sand and salt, things he could pour in there to get a better sound. None of that worked. It worked, but the guitar was £1,000,000.
Yeah, like how much would a Dreadnought weigh with sand filled inside of it? Yeah. That's awesome.
So Appleton's doing all of those things. And at the same time, also in the 1930s, Les Paul was trying to build a solid body guitar. So Les's original design was basically a block of wood with a Gibson neck, bolted onto the end. And he called it the log.
The log.
Yeah. And so he would play that out, but the public had no idea what it was because they were used to the shape of a guitar. And so he took an Epiphone, almost like a 335 body style, like a semi-hollow kind of shape, or like an arch-top body, I should say, right? 335 didn't exist yet.
Oh, yeah, like an Emperor Triumph or something from back in those days, whatever Epiphone was making, right? Yeah.
And he, if you're like looking at the body, he cuts it into thirds, gets rid of the middle slice, and then puts the log in there and like glues the other sides of the body on there. So it looks like a guitar and it's got F-holes. He played that in front of audiences and they understood what it was and it made it look like a guitar. So we have two people, Appleton and Les Paul, at the same time are trying to make an electric guitar. And both of them have succeeded. They have made an electric guitar, but they're not fit for market for one reason or another. One of them is full of sand, and the other one is a block of wood with some novelty wood glued to it.
Well, yeah, it kind of looks like those like those Yamaha violins that are just a stick, but then they put a metal cage on the outside of it to make it look Yeah,
because it's what you're used to. Yeah, totally. So in 1941, coming out of the 30s, O.W. Appleton gets a plank of pine and he decides that he's going to carve, the shape of a guitar out of the piece of this wood, which feels dumb and obvious, but is an innovation. So he carves, a single cutaway, a slightly arched top, but it's a solid body electric guitar. It's brilliant. It works great, right? There's no more problems in amplifying your guitar. It works great. He calls the folks at Gibson and he's like, hey, can I just get a neck blank? I'm just going to pop a neck on this thing. They send him one and he calls the guitar the App, like Appleton. But yeah, the first App was created in 1941. So unlike the other electric guitars that were being offered, this wasn't a hollow body like we were talking about, like Epiphone would have made. And it also wasn't a Hawaiian style, lap steel kind of thing, right? Those guitars had pickups in them, but none of those were solid body. This really is an innovation. It doesn't sound like it because we're so used to a solid body electric guitar. This is the first guy to carve a block of wood into the shape of a guitar and put pickups on it. So he refines his design. He takes it to Gibson. This is in 1943. He wants to talk manufacturing. They said no one will ever play that, which sounds like Gibson.
Of course, yeah, not for us. We've tried it all, kid. We've tried mandolins. We've tried banjos.
Exactly.
We know what people don't want.
Appleton attempts to patent his design, but he's kind of a poor inventor type. He has no access to a patent attorney, and he calls a couple people, and he gets a bunch of money stolen from fake patent attorneys. So there was mail-in services where you could basically mail in your design, and they would be like, we'll patent it for you, but they really just steal your money through the mail. And it happened to him more than once. It happened to him several times. And he's just a dude trying to patent his design, but he gives up. He's like, I'm not going to waste any more money on this if everyone's just going to scam me. He can't get it patented, and he can't go to any other factories because basically everyone's super involved in the war effort now. So it's hard to get wood and manufacture things like this. He just kind of drops the project. By the way, I didn't say it yet, but you should go look up this guitar. If you search for O.W. Appleton and the guitar, the App, it looks just like a Les Paul. It's kind of stretched out. It's a little off kilter. Like the way an Explorer is off kilter. It kind of looks like that. It's a little weird, but it's undeniably a Les Paul.
Well, and the single cut is maybe not as Florentine or something like that, but it's come on. You look at it and it's this is, if you saw a Les Paul once and had to draw it from memory, this is what it would look like,
Going back to the Les Paul, remember, he designed the log. This is also in 1941. Les Paul goes to the Gibson executives and is like, this is what you need. You need to sell the log. So both of these guys pitch to Gibson within a couple of years, right? Appleton pitches in 1943, Les Paul pitches in 1941, but they've designed the guitars like concurrently. Gibson is like, that's a broomstick with pickups. That is the quote from Gibson. Les Paul doesn't give up because he's a name and he's got money and stuff. He spends 10 years trying to convince Gibson executives that this is what they need to do. Appleton just doesn't have the money to compete, right? But Les Paul's there like, do it, do it, do it.
And at that time, like you said, Les Paul was a famous guitar player. He was playing with like the Andrews sisters and all that kind of stuff. So
Exactly.
yeah, he had time and money, right?
Yeah, so to recap the whole thing, you know, you can kind of read between the lines what happened here. Multiple people innovate through the 1930s, and Les Paul goes to Gibson with a bad design in 1941. Appleton goes to Gibson with a good design in 1943. And then in 1952, Gibson is forced to go to market with a solid body guitar to compete with Fender. So the only thing that's going to make them do it is their competition. Gibson is not going to innovate on their own. They're going to wait until enough pressure has been put on them by the market. If only there was some kind of corollary with like an acoustic guitar. For instance, if a company released a large body acoustic guitar and then Gibson has to respond by creating their own large body acoustic guitar. Yeah. So the exact same thing happens again. And they basically take, this is unconfirmed, right? Little small conspiracy theory. They basically take Appleton's design and they plop Les Paul's name on it because this is not Les Paul's actual design. This is a different design than Les Paul came up with. But they put Les Paul's name on it. They slapped those two products together. They released that in 1952. So 10 years after Appleton has pitched Gibson, Appleton gets a letter from a friend who works at Gibson. And the letter says, well, App, you see our competition, Fender, has finally forced us to come out with your solid guitar. Sure wish we had listened to you. And the letter included a brochure for the new Gibson Les Paul. App crumples up the letter and he throws it away. There is no evidence.
App!
Yeah. He's so mad.
I was going to say, I could almost not blame him on that one, though, right? Because that would just be heart-wrenching. That's... Oh.
His guitar is still out there. I mean, it's in a museum. You can, like, go look at it.
I was just looking, too, and it seems like his son is kind of taking up the mantle of, like, you know...
Telling the story.
Yeah, educating people about this, and I think it should be part of the dialogue. You know what I mean? Like, whatever you want to think about it, but...
To say it concisely, Gibson steals their headstock design, the design for their most popular acoustic model, and the design for their most popular electric model, then sues other guitar manufacturers for making improvements on their own designs. Own designs, in quotation marks.
Oh. Pretty deep, deep. I'll be the foil to your argument and give what I want to say the most diplomatic counterpoint that I can to that. At best, Gibson has been responding to innovations from other people and playing catch up over the years, and the way that they did that was maybe by cheating and stealing.
Well said. Yeah, true.
Marcel, why is there paint everywhere?
Oh, me and JD are repainting the ship's name.
Okay, that's dumb and still doesn't tell me why JD is covered in green paint.
Yeah, JD hasn't been super helpful. I don't think he knows what paint is, do you, buddy?
Not at all.
Okay, I'll clean this up later. Just show me the new sign. I know you're better at spelling than that. Antique is not spelled A-N-T-E-E-K.
No. This is like the Star Wars novelizations, where they don't write R2-D2 alphanumerically, they write it phonetically, like R2-D2.
Why do you know that? And why do you care? Those books aren't even canon anymore.
Come on, it seems more sci-fi this way. And it was your idea to rename the ship.
No, it was your idea. JD, did you know about this? Did you let him do this?
Sorry.
Hey, leave JD out of this. He helped me pick the color and helped me work the paint can.
JD, why did you pick green?
I'm not sure.
He's just being shy. He told me he picked green because of the Joe Diffie song. I told him he should have used red, but it looked good to JD in John D. Green.
You know, you're kind of pushing it. That's not a bluegrass reference or a sci-fi reference, and that's kind of our whole shtick here. But you know, the sign is more sci-fi this way.
Good. I'm glad you like it, because we relabeled a bunch of stuff in your quarters, too. I can't wait for you to see how we spelled closet.
And you know, man, there was something that you said a minute ago that kind of reminds me of a little of a little path we could go down here, a little rabbit hole, you know. You were mentioning in 1952, right, that Gibson was scrambling to release their solid body guitar design because of a man and company.
Yes.
Leo Fender of the Fender Guitar Company. And I have a little story about him. Did you know that Leo Fender killed Western swing music?
Get your tinfoil hat on for this bluegrass conspiracy theory.
No, I did not. Please educate me.
Well, you've already laid the groundwork for this, and I love it. You've fallen directly into my trap, Marcel. So you mentioned, right, like through the 40s, there were some innovations in like the world of pickups and electronics for amplifying guitars, mandolins, you know, and steel guitars, right? So lap steel guitars at the time. And that's really where Fender made his name first. His kind of first projects, he was a Les Paul type and an O.W. Appleton type. He was a like garage tinkerer, you know, mad scientist, making crazy projects out of planks of wood. You know, what was it with electronic dudes and planks of wood in the 40s? You know what I mean?
Yeah, they were just getting 2x4s and making instruments.
I think I can make this sound good. But yeah, so Fender, you know, in the 40s was a tinkerer and a garage electronics guy, and loved Western swing music and the sound of the lap steel guitar. He was a huge Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys fan, in fact.
Yeah.
And there, have you heard this before, that like Fender, as he was kind of making new innovations and new pickups and new amplifiers, anytime the Wills band was coming through town, he would drop off new product at their bus and just give it to them, because he was such a huge fan. Like, isn't that kind of crazy?
That's cool.
Yeah, there are other stories too, like later down the line of doing the same thing in Bakersfield. He drove all the way up to Bakersfield with a carload of Fender amps and guitars to give to Buck Owens.
Yeah, that one makes more sense to me.
Right? Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing, right? Like, that one makes sense because at that time, like, the loud, solid body electric guitar was already a thing that we were used to, right? It was like, you know.
Yeah.
But like Western swing and solid body electric guitars, you're like, something's weird here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. But in the 40s, Fender strikes this relationship with Bob Wills, you know, and they become pals. So much so that like it's not just freebies anymore. Wills is stopping through town because Wills bought all the gear for his band members. So Eldon Shamblin's like Epiphone that he played forever was Bob Wills's Epiphone. Like, he would give his guitar players and stuff.
Yeah.
Nice instruments to play, you know?
I'm imagining them on stage and they're wearing like Fender hats and Fender shirts and like Fender, I don't know, joggers. Fender slides.
Sitting on Fender stools, right? Yeah. But it's kind of funny to me. Like, the first time I heard that story, I was like, no crap. Like, you're thinking California Leo Fender. And most of us, when we think early Fender, we're thinking like Buddy Holly or the Beach Boys or something like that, right? Like Strats and early rock and roll. But he was obsessed with Western swing and the Playboys. In fact, like in 1947, Junior Bernard, the guy that played guitar for Bob Wills for a stretch of time and kind of innovated the rock and roll guitar sound. A lot of people attribute some of those early distorted rock tones to Junior Bernard, largely because of the steel guitar pickup that Leo Fender installed on his Epiphone Emperor at the time. So, yeah, interesting, right? Even like moving a little bit forward in history, in 1954, so like a little bit later, right? Eldon Shamblin, the like legendary kind of sock rhythm, walking bass rhythm guitar player for Bob Wills, he gets one of the very first Fender Strats from Leo Fender. And no joke, till the day Shamblin died, that was like the only guitar you would ever see him play on stage. Yeah, there's a great cool DVD called The Legends of Western Swing Guitar that anyone should check out. And it's got, you know, tons of cuts of later Eldon from when he's like in his, you know, 60s and stuff like that, playing that Strat. It was sprayed gold fleck like the gold top Les Pauls, but it tarnishes like them over the years, and it turned green and eventually like this weird brown color. So it's kind of this like But you can see like where he sweat all over it and everything. It was like totally, it wouldn't be hard to believe that that was his main axe, right?
It's like dating a tree. It's like looking at the rings. You can look at the shade of the guitar and roughly tell what time period you're in.
Exactly. But like all I'm kind of painting here. So we've arrived at 1954 from like the early 1940s when Fender starts making these steel guitars, and this entire decade, just like you're talking about with Les Paul and O.W. Appleton, Fender is innovating. He's making improvements so he can impress Bob Wills and his pals when they're coming through town. It's like, check out this hot new double neck steel I made for you, Leon, or check out this Strat that I made for you, Eldon. You guys can play so much louder now. And in fact, after the war, you see bands get smaller because they couldn't pay as many musicians, right? And amplification helped this phenomenon go to the dance halls, right? You could take a smaller ensemble and get just as big a sound. And now I think you can kind of see where I'm headed with this. In the mid 1950s, this is where Fender's kind of obsession with the steel guitar, helping his pals out in Western swing music, starts to go kind of out of control in terms of his relationship to the music and the instruments that he's making. These instruments start getting picked up by teenage kids who figure out that if you dime out the gain knob on your amplifier, you get this really cool, gritty sound, and it's loud as hell, and it pisses your parents off and all that kind of stuff. So as rock and roll music hits in the mid-1950s, just like bluegrass music in the mid-1950s, Western swing gets like almost wiped out overnight in the first generation of rock and roll. And guess what most of the guys are playing, you know what I mean, on the radio? They've either got a Gibson ES335 or a Fender Telecaster or Stratocaster, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like Fender's magnum opus to his good buddy Bob Wills and Eldon Shamblin and Leon McAuliffe and all these guys ended up being their undoing in the end.
It's kind of tough because this is a Jack Devereaux quote. Jack says that if you're playing a Telecaster, you should be able to hear it on the moon.
I love that. I love you, Jack.
And he's not wrong, you know. Look, if you're not losing hearing, you're not playing a Telecaster, you know.
Oh no, it's got to spank. It's got to hit you in that upper, like almost the like dog whistle tones. Yes, you know what I mean? You're like, exactly. I didn't know that treble frequencies could hurt that bad until I played a Telecaster.
Yeah, you need like a small trickle of blood coming out of your ear. And then you finally dialed in that tone. You found the sweet spot. So, you know, a small part of me identifies with the kids that were picking up those instruments. But also, yeah, what a terrible thing to like innovate so much for all of your buddies, and then the thing that you innovate ends up being their undoing. Oof.
Yeah. Ugh. And here's the bright side to the story. You know, everything is cyclical, you know what I mean, in terms of the popularity of musical genres and stuff. And I mentioned Buck Owens and the Buckaroos a while ago, a direct descendant, in fact, of Western swing music. So it's almost like it had to skip like a 10-year generation or something before the kind of honky-tonk country bands that grew up listening to Bob Wills and all of those things utilized that Fender sound to kind of push country music in that like next direction.
And if you asked any of those guys, they'd probably tell you that Bob Wills is still the king.
I think that's where it ends right there.
Seems like the boys might be wrapping this one up. You two mind breaking the fourth wall and telling the folks where they can find you online?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, JD. I'm Marcel. You can find me at Lessons with Marcel on YouTube and lessonswithmarcel.com. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Hayes, where can the people find you?
The peeps can find me where you are, my friend. Just type in Hayes Griffin on YouTube or go to hayesgriffin.com. Or if you're interested in some guitar lessons, go to hayesgriffin.club and check it out there.